The rotor blast knocked my groceries clean off the porch, carrots flying, butter gone, pie nearly airborne. Then Calvin stepped out of the helicopter like some celebrity messiah, filming himself while the family clapped like trained seals. And Dad? He ran past me, ran, to greet him, stepping over the sweet potatoes I'd paid for with the last of my cash. But what gutted me wasn't the landing. It was Calvin raising a toast at dinner and smirking. Dad made me executor. Guess I'm the man of the family now. They all laughed. I swallowed hard. I didn't have a helicopter, but I had records, receipts, and one name Calvin never should have forged. Let's just say, Thanksgiving wasn't the only thing about to get carved up. My name is Daniel Maddox, and I'm 45 years old. Each morning starts before dawn in my workshop, checking invoices and loading tools for another day of honest contracts. My younger brother Calvin jets between coastal mansions while I build decks and repair roofs, keeping my promises one nail at a time. At our father's house, where family gatherings turn into measuring contests, Calvin's stories boom across rooms while mine seem to fade into the wallpaper. The old accountant, Mr. Reynolds, taught me years ago to document everything. Every receipt, every supplier handshake, every completed job. Those records fill 3 fireproof boxes in my garage, telling truths nobody's bothered to notice yet. I'm bringing groceries to Thanksgiving this year, just basic things we actually need. My jaw tightens when I think about Calvin's inevitable show, but I won't swallow my pride again. But let me start from the beginning. I pulled up to Dad's house around noon, the rusty brakes on my work truck squealing like they needed attention. 2 brown paper bags sat in the passenger seat. Nothing fancy, just real food bought with real money. You know the kind. Fresh carrots with the stems still attached, celery that actually snaps when you bend it, sweet potatoes that hadn't been sitting in storage since last winter. I'd splurged on real butter too, the kind Mom used to insist on, and picked up a homemade apple pie from Mrs. Henderson's bakery downtown. It wasn't expensive, but it was honest. The driveway looked like a used car lot. Aunt Sarah's minivan, Uncle Pete's SUV, 3 or 4 sedans I didn't recognize right away, all crammed in there like some kind of family Tetris game. I had to park on the street, which meant carrying those bags up the long gravel drive. Ever notice how paper bags always feel their heaviest when you're trying to look casual? November had stripped most of the leaves off the maples, leaving them scattered across Dad's lawn in damp clumps. The air had that sharp edge to it, the kind that warns you winter's getting impatient. I could smell wood smoke from somewhere down the street. Probably old Mr. Wilson's fireplace. He always started burning wood way before anyone else thought it was cold enough. Dad was standing in the doorway before I made it halfway up the walk. He had his phone in his hand, thumb scrolling, barely glancing up as I approached. Calvin's running late, he announced, like that was the most important news of the day. Says he's got something special planned. My stomach did that familiar twist. I brought vegetables, I said, hefting the bags. And pie. Mm-hmm, Dad mumbled, eyes still on his screen. Kitchen's full of people. Watch where you step. He wasn't kidding. The kitchen was packed tighter than my tool shed, with every surface covered in dishes and every chair filled with relatives. Cousin Amy was holding court near the coffee maker, her voice carrying above the general chaos. Calvin said we shouldn't miss his entrance this year. Said it'll be something to remember. I focused on unpacking my bags, trying to ignore how my throat was getting tight. The butter went in the fridge, vegetables lined up neat on the counter. Mrs. Henderson's pie, still warm, found a spot between Aunt Sarah's famous pecan monstrosity and something store-bought in aluminum. You ever notice how a room can be completely full but still make you feel alone? I found a spot by the window, away from the main circus. From there, I could see more cars pulling up, more relatives piling out with their covered dishes and wine bottles. I kept my breathing steady, the way I do when I'm up on a roof and the height starts getting to me. Just focus on the next step, the next task. I'd help with the turkey, maybe do some carving. There'd be dishes to wash later. There are always dishes to wash. But something in my gut told me to step outside for a minute, get some air that wasn't thick with other people's excitement. The porch boards creaked under my work boots. They needed replacing, but Dad always said Calvin would handle it when he had time. Dark clouds were building up overhead, the kind that usually meant snow was coming. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder, but it grew stronger, more mechanical, a steady thrum that made the windows vibrate slightly in their frames. I looked up, scanning the heavy sky, and felt my jaw clench so tight it hurt. You didn't need to be a genius to know what was coming. All those hints about Calvin's big entrance, all those knowing smiles, Dad checking his phone every 30 seconds, it was adding up to something that would make my paper bags of groceries look even smaller than they already did. That sound kept building, getting closer, until it wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was in my bones, in my teeth, in the floorboards under my feet. I stood there on Dad's porch, watching those clouds part like curtains for Calvin's latest show, and thought about all the quiet mornings I'd spent making sure my books balanced to the penny. The helicopter's roar hit like a physical thing, rattling the windows and drowning out every other sound. I'd been around machinery all my life, circular saws, jackhammers, you name it. But this was different. This wasn't the honest noise of work. This was pure showmanship, the kind of entrance that screamed, "Look at me," until your ears bled. The massive black shape swooped over Dad's maple trees, sending what few leaves were left into a panic. You know those nature documentaries where they show a hawk diving for its prey? That's what it looked like. Only instead of talons, this bird had landing skids. And instead of dinner, it was carrying my brother's ego. My grocery bags didn't stand a chance. The rotor wash hit like a tornado, and those paper bags just gave up the fight. They split right down their sides, sending carrots, celery, and onions rolling across the porch like they were making a break for freedom. I lunged for the pie, barely catching it before it could join the great escape. The butter went skidding past my boot and ended up somewhere in Dad's shrubs. Through the chaos of whirling leaves and flying produce, I watched the helicopter settle onto our father's lawn. The skids touched down right between Mom's old flower beds, the ones I still maintained every spring because Dad never got around to it. The engine wound down, but the blades kept spinning, creating this rippling circle of flattened grass around the machine. Calvin emerged like he was stepping onto a red carpet, phone held high to film his own grand entrance. His designer jacket probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He was laughing. That same laugh he'd used since we were kids when he'd pulled off something particularly outrageous and gotten away with it. "Happy Thanksgiving!" he shouted, over the dying rotor noise. The crowd of relatives on the porch, when had they all gathered, erupted in cheers and applause. Phones came out everywhere, recording the moment, preserving evidence of Calvin's latest triumph. Dad pushed past me like I wasn't even there, nearly knocking over what was left of my sad little grocery pile. His face lit up brighter than I'd seen since Calvin's last visit. He spread his arms wide, practically running across the lawn to meet his conquering hero. "You should have told us you were coming," Dad called out, like this whole spectacle hadn't been carefully planned and teased for days. I knelt there on the porch, picking up scattered vegetables, trying to gather the pieces of my dignity along with them. The cold from the boards seeped through my jeans. A carrot had rolled under the porch swing, and I had to stretch full length to reach it. The wood was rough against my palm. Another repair job Dad was waiting for Calvin to get around to. Someone's designer boots appeared next to my hand. "Oh my God, Calvin, that was amazing!" It was Cousin Amy, her voice pitched high with excitement. "Was that the new Augusta 119? My husband's been dying to fly in one of those." I stood up, arms full of bruised vegetables, and headed for the kitchen. Behind me, Calvin's voice carried clearly, "You know me, Amy. Only the best for family visits." The kitchen had transformed while I was outside. The practical holiday mess of cooking had been pushed aside to make room for what looked like a photo shoot. Calvin held court by the island, surrounded by admirers, while Dad beamed beside him like a proud coach on championship night. Phones flashed. Stories flew. Everyone wanted to know about the helicopter, about Calvin's latest deals, about his new house in the city. I found a corner to sort through my rescued groceries. Most of the vegetables were still good, just needed washing. The pie had survived intact, thank God for small mercies. The butter was a lost cause, but I'd brought extra, knowing how these family gatherings could go through it. My hands were steady as I worked, like they always were on job sites when things went sideways. Keep moving. Stay focused. Get through the next hour, then the next. Dinner would come eventually, and I'd keep my mouth shut through that too. But something in my gut told me that staying quiet wasn't going to be enough this time. Not with Calvin riding this high. Not with Dad glowing like that. Not with every relative in the house falling over themselves to be part of the show. The kitchen chaos eventually settled into dinner, with everyone finding their assigned seats around Dad's expandable oak table. Steam rose from serving bowls, gravy boats made their rounds, and the traditional Thanksgiving scents filled the air. Just like Mom used to orchestrate, except she would have made sure everyone got equal attention. My green bean casserole sat mostly untouched near one end while Calvin's catered sides drew rave reviews. You ever notice how some moments freeze in your memory? Like that split second before a ladder shifts wrong, or when you spot the first crack that means a foundation's compromised. This was one of those moments. Calvin stood up, crystal wine glass in hand. The kind Dad only brought out for special occasions. Usually Calvin's visits. "Before we dig in," he said, tapping the glass with his designer watch, "I'd like to share some news." The table fell quiet. Even the kids stopped fidgeting, sensing something important was coming. I speared a piece of turkey, trying to look casual while my stomach tightened. "As most of you know, I've been helping Dad organize some of his affairs lately." Calvin's voice carried that smooth, practiced tone he used in his promotional videos. "And after careful consideration, he's decided to name me executor of the estate. You know, to keep things professional." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The silence inside my head grew louder than the approving murmurs around the table. I looked at Dad, hoping to see some hesitation, some sign this was another of Calvin's grand announcements without substance. But Dad was nodding, smiling that proud smile that seemed reserved for his younger son. "It just makes sense," Dad added, like he was confirming the sky was blue. "Calvin deals with these things every day." Aunt Martha chimed in. "Oh, that's wonderful. Such a responsible choice." I set my fork down, carefully, conscious of every movement. The green beans on my plate suddenly looked about as appetizing as sawdust. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. Cousins smiled. Someone started asking Calvin about estate law, and he launched into another polished speech. "Really," Calvin continued, raising his glass higher, "it just makes me the man of the family now." He looked directly at me, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, the same look he'd worn when he'd blamed me for breaking Mom's favorite vase 30 years ago. Heat crept up under my collar. I could feel my jaw clenching, the way it did when a client tried to skip out on a payment. But this wasn't a job site where I could simply file a lien. This was family. This was Dad choosing sides in the most public way possible. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Just like when I'm checking load-bearing walls for stress points. 1, 2, 3. Had to keep it together. Any reaction now would just prove what they probably already thought, that I was the bitter older brother, jealous of Calvin's success. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't even there. Someone passed the rolls. Calvin held court from his end of the table, telling stories about his latest business ventures. Dad hung on every word, asking questions that let Calvin expand on his brilliance. I counted breaths, and tried to look interested in my cooling dinner. Dessert would come soon. After that, I'd find a quiet moment with Dad, try to understand his thinking, maybe salvage some dignity from this wreck without causing a scene that would echo through family gatherings for years to come. Keep it professional, like Calvin said, though watching him pose for yet another photo. Dessert already tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Looking around that table, I saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't just about today. This was years of subtle comparisons and dismissals hardening into something official. Every time Dad had praised Calvin's vision while barely acknowledging my steady work. Every family gathering where Calvin's latest scheme got more attention than my completed projects. Now it was policy, carved in legal stone. You know those moments when you're about to step into a conversation that could change everything? When your hands are steady, but your chest feels like it's full of concrete? That's where I found myself. Watching Dad through the den doorway. He was alone for once, settled in his leather armchair, the one Mom bought him just before she passed. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, same as it had since I was a kid. Calvin's helicopter had finally left, taking its noise with it, but leaving plenty of damage behind. I knocked softly on the door frame. "Dad, got a minute?" He glanced up from his phone, probably checking Calvin's latest social media update. "Sure, Danny. Make it quick, though. Your brother's sending me some documents to review." I stepped in and closed the door, choosing my words carefully. "About the executor decision. Already done." He cut in, not even looking up. "Papers are being drawn up. Could we talk about it? I mean, I've been handling my own business books for 20 years. Clean audits, steady growth." Dad's laugh stopped me cold. Not a cruel laugh exactly, but dismissive. Like I'd suggested building a skyscraper with Lincoln Logs. "Danny, Calvin knows business. You don't. It's that simple." My throat tightened. "I know enough to keep my doors open without debt. Every invoice paid, every tax, filing on time. That counts for something, doesn't it? Small potatoes." He waved his hand like brushing away a fly. Calvin operates on a whole different scale. You've seen his operation. Multiple states, hundreds of employees. That's real business. I pulled out my phone, fingers already calling up 20 years of clean books. Look at these numbers, Dad. Solid growth, year over year. No bailouts, no creative accounting. Daniel. He used my full name, the way he did when I was 10 and trying to argue my way out of bedtime. Your brother knows what he's doing. End of discussion. The den suddenly felt smaller, its wood panels closing in. Family photos watched from the walls. Calvin's college graduation front and center, my high school picture tucked in a corner. Even here, the pattern held. I just think, I started. You think too small, Dad said, finally meeting my eyes. Always have. Calvin sees the big picture. That's why he's successful, and that's why he's executor. Discussion over. The words hit like a hammer to the chest. 20 years of proving myself through honest work, through showing up when promised, through building something real, and Dad still couldn't see it, or wouldn't. I stood there a moment longer, watching him return to his phone. The leather armchair creaked as he shifted, Mom's last gift supporting, another dismissal. Inside, something hardened. Not anger exactly, but a cold certainty that approval would never come from this room. I left without slamming the door. Small victory maybe, but it was mine. The hallway bustled with relatives still celebrating Calvin's news, their laughter following me outside. I made it to my truck before my hands started shaking. The driveway felt safer than another round of photos and congratulations. I sat in the cab, key in the ignition, watching my breath fog the windshield. The house glowed behind me, warm light spilling from windows that had witnessed 1,000 family dinners. Tonight's would echo for a while. A few deep breaths steadied my hands. No point causing a scene now. It would only prove Dad right about who could handle business matters. Better to drive home, sleep if possible, and tackle this mess in the morning. Things always looked different after a night's work at the shop anyway. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. In the rearview mirror, the house stood bright against the darkness, looking exactly like it had this morning. But everything had shifted, hadn't it? The ground wasn't quite as solid as it had been when I'd arrived with those grocery bags. Monday hit like a hammer to the gut. You know that feeling when your phone keeps buzzing, but every call brings worse news? That was my morning. First up was Tom Harris. 20 years of deck builds and additions. Kids growing up together. Christmas cards on my fridge. His voice had that awkward pitch people get when they're about to let you down easy. Danny, I hate doing this, but he cleared his throat. Calvin's company reached out. They're offering this family discount package that's hard to pass up. You understand, right? My coffee went cold while I listened to him apologize. Sure, Tom. No hard feelings. What else could I say? By 10 o'clock, 3 more calls landed the same way. Each one started with, "You've always done great work," and ended with, "Calvin's rates are just too good to ignore." The worst part? These weren't just clients. They were friends who couldn't meet my eyes anymore, even over the phone. I opened my laptop and started tallying numbers. You ever watch your life's work dissolve into red ink? Every cancellation meant another hole in next month's schedule. The margins I'd built so carefully over 2 decades were crumbling faster than old grout. Around noon, I pulled up my account spreadsheets. The math was brutal. 4 major projects gone, 3 more wobbling, and my cushion account looking thinner by the hour. I'd always run lean, pride myself on it actually. But this was different. This was surgical. Remember those TV shows where they slice away at someone's safety net, strand by strand? That's what it felt like watching my client list shrink. Each name crossed off meant another bill that might bounce, another supplier payment I'd have to juggle. Speaking of suppliers, Mike at the lumberyard called next. Hearing some rumors, Danny? You okay for that payment this week? Just need till Friday, I said, my throat tight, moving some things around. He paused longer than comfortable. All right, Friday then. I opened my personal accounts and started cutting. Canceled streaming services, gym membership, even the coffee subscription I'd treated myself to last Christmas. Small potatoes maybe, but every dollar counted now. The mortgage payment loomed 2 weeks out, and insurance right behind it. I spent the afternoon cold calling leads, knocking on doors where I'd seen construction starting. Got a lot of already contracted and maybe next time. By sunset, my prospect list looked like a grocery receipt after a diet, thin and full of crossed-out items. Back at the shop, I ran the numbers again. 2 weeks. That's what I had before things got truly desperate. 2 weeks to either land enough new work to cover overhead or, Well, let's just say I found myself staring at my tools longer than usual. That toolbox, by the by. Workbench? 20 years of carefully chosen equipment. Each piece bought with saved cash, maintained like it was gold. Because it was, in its way. The table saw alone could cover a month's mortgage. The full kit? Might buy enough time to figure something out. I pulled up a local sales site, cursor hovering over Create Listing. The thought of selling tools felt like admitting defeat. But numbers don't care about pride, do they? And these numbers were screaming for attention. My phone buzzed again. Another client's name lighting up the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Some conversations, you just need to delay until morning. Some decisions, too. I sat there in my darkening shop, surrounded by tools that might not be mine much longer, wondering how many more calls like this I could take. The calendar on my wall showed plenty of blank spaces where work used to be. 2 weeks suddenly felt like a very short time. The next morning hit different. Know that hollow feeling when you're about to sell something that's part of you? I laid out my tools on the workshop bench, each one carrying years of memories, and started taking pictures. Click. The table saw that helped build Mrs. Peterson's wraparound porch, where she still drinks her morning coffee. Click. The router I used on every custom cabinet job since '02. Click. That special Japanese chisel my wife gave me on our 10th anniversary, saying, "For the man who builds dreams." Ever try making your life's work look pretty for strangers on the internet? I adjusted the lighting, wiped down each tool one more time, like dressing them up for their own funeral. My hands shook enough to blur some shots. Had to retake them. Between photos, I kept running the numbers. You know how accountants talk about creative solutions? Well, I'd tried every creative angle I could think of. Stretched the budget thinner than dollar store paper towels. But that mortgage payment kept staring back at me, and the math wouldn't budge. I pulled up my accounts again, probably the 100th time this week. There it was in black and white. Even if I sold every power tool I owned, I'd only buy myself maybe 3 months. Then what? Start over with borrowed equipment, competing against Calvin's rock-bottom rates? The morning crept by like molasses in January. Each tool I photographed felt heavier than the last. You spend decades building something solid, honest, and watch it slip through your fingers like water. It does something to a man's insides. I was sorting through the photos, trying to write descriptions that didn't sound desperate, when someone knocked on my door. Not the sharp rap of a salesman, or the casual tap of a neighbor. This was the deliberate knock of someone who'd thought it through. Standing on my porch was Mr. Reynolds, Dad's old accountant. Retired now, but still straight-backed as ever, clutching a manila folder like it held state secrets. I hadn't seen him since Dad's Christmas party 2 years back. "Daniel," he said, nodding exactly once. "Got a minute?" I gestured him in, noting how his eyes caught the tool photos spread across my laptop screen. He didn't comment, just set his folder on the kitchen table with careful precision. "Should have spoken up sooner," he started, adjusting his glasses. "Been watching things unfold. Noticed some irregularities in your brother's books before I retired. Nothing I could prove then, but..." He tapped the folder. "The pattern's clearer now." My throat tightened. "Mr. Reynolds, I appreciate the concern, but if you're here to offer..." "Not charity," he cut in, sharp as a new blade. "Information. Guidance, if you want it. There's a difference between going under and getting pushed under, Daniel. What Calvin's doing, it leaves tracks. Books don't lie, even when people do." I stood there, feeling something shift in my chest, like when you're demoing a wall and suddenly find solid structure behind the rot. "Those client contracts he's stealing," Reynolds continued. "Everyone needs documentation, permits, material orders. Follow the paper trail, and integrity proves itself." He opened the folder, revealing neat columns of dates and numbers. "Question is, do you want to learn how? You know that moment in disaster movies when someone finally finds a way out of the burning building? That's what his words felt like. A door opening when all I'd seen were walls. I looked at my laptop, still showing those tool photos. Selling them suddenly felt like surrendering more than equipment. Reynolds watched me, patient as aged wood. "How long would this take?" I asked, pulling out a kitchen chair. "Depends how deep the rot goes." He settled across from me, spreading papers with methodical care. "But I've got time if you've got courage." I closed my laptop, pushed it aside. The tools could wait. Right now, I had numbers to learn. Mr. Reynolds drew out a sheet covered in his precise handwriting. "First thing about forensic accounting. You follow the money backward. Every transaction leaves a shadow." Mr. Reynolds spread the papers like he was dealing cards, each one telling its own story. "See these equipment leases?" He tapped a document with his knuckle. "Calvin's showing them as assets, but they're actually hidden loans. Classic shell game. I leaned in closer, squinting at the numbers. Sure, I could read a balance sheet. Had to, running my own business. But this was different. Like trying to read a foreign language that looked almost like English. Walk me through it, I said, pulling my reading glasses from my shirt pocket. What am I looking at? Right here. He traced a line with his pen. Company claims full ownership of that helicopter he loves showing off. But look at the fine print. It's actually leased through a subsidiary, with payments structured as consulting fees. And guess whose name is on the real lease agreement? My stomach dropped. Dad's? Bingo. Your brother's been using family property as collateral without disclosure. That's not just unethical. It's fraud. You ever watch one of those crime shows where they finally connect all the red strings on the evidence board? That's what it felt like, sitting at my kitchen table while Reynolds laid it all out. Each paper was another string, and they all led back to Calvin. Here's the thing, Reynolds said, checking his watch like he was timing a race. Year-end audit's coming up. December 18th. I counted the weeks in my head. That's not much time. No, it's not. Once those auditors certify the books, Calvin's version becomes official. But if we can document the fraud before then, he let the sentence hang there, heavy with possibility. What exactly do we need? Reynolds pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Supplier statements, especially ones showing different numbers than what's in Calvin's reports. Invoice trails that don't match up. Internal documents with contradicting figures. He looked up at me. You've been in business here 20 years. Who do you trust? Who might talk? I thought about Mike at the lumber yard. How he'd mentioned payment issues with Calvin's company last month. Sarah at the permit office, who'd raised an eyebrow at some of Calvin's recent applications. I've got some ideas. Good. Start there, but quietly. Reynolds tapped his pen against the pad. Calvin's got friends in high places now. If he catches wind of this before we're ready, I understand. And I did. This wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about timing. Move too slow. We'd miss our window. Move too fast. Make noise. And Calvin would see us coming. I grabbed my own notepad and started making lists. I'll need supplies. Extra paper for the printer. Something to organize all this. Label maker, Reynolds suggested. Color-coded files. This is about building a story the auditors can't ignore. I checked my wall calendar, drew a thick red line across December 18th. The audit week. Our deadline. Everything had to be ready by then. Documented, organized, irrefutable. We'll need to work nights, I said. Keep this off Calvin's radar. Reynolds nodded. I'm retired. My schedule's clear. But you'll need to stay sharp. Early starts, late finishes. I set 3 alarms on my phone. 4:30 a.m. 5 a.m. 5:30 a.m. No room for oversleeping. Not with this timeline. One more thing, Reynolds said, gathering his papers. Everything we collect needs backup copies. Store them separately. If Calvin realizes what we're doing, he'll try to bury it, I finished. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but also straightened my backbone. This wasn't just about saving my business anymore. It was about exposing the truth. I walked Reynolds to his car, watched him drive away. Back inside, I stared at that red circle on my calendar. 3 weeks to unravel what Calvin had spent years weaving. 3 weeks to either watch him cement his lies, or watch them all come crashing down. Time to get to work. We started that night at Mike's lumberyard. After hours when the place was locked up tight. Mike had always been straight with me. 20 years of on-time payments builds that kind of trust. When I called, he didn't hesitate. Come around back, he'd said. I'll leave the office light on. The gravel crunched under our feet as Reynolds and I walked up to the small trailer that served as Mike's office. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and sawdust. Some things never change in this business. You know that smell? The one that means honest work and early mornings? Mike had his books spread out across his desk, paper clips marking specific pages. Been meaning to talk to someone about this, he said, tapping a stack of invoices. Calvin's company. They've got a way of paying just enough to keep the account open, then promising the rest is coming. Reynolds pulled out his notepad. How long has this been going on? 6, 7 months? Mike shuffled through the papers. Started with small delays, then partial payments. Now we're looking at 60 grand outstanding. My jaw tightened. That was more than most of my annual lumber costs. Mind if we make copies? Reynolds asked, already reaching for his portable scanner. Mike waved us ahead. Take what you need. Just keep my name quiet as long as you can. Calvin's got connections with the bigger suppliers now. I nodded, understanding the fear in his voice. We'll be careful, Mike. Promise. Reynolds worked methodically, scanning each document while I made notes. Something caught his eye on the third invoice. "Look here," he said. "Invoice number CG11457 shows up twice. Same amount, different dates. Duplicate billing?" I asked. "More likely double-dipping. Report the same expense twice. Pocket the difference." Reynolds added it to his growing list of red flags. We hit 3 more suppliers that night. Same pattern everywhere. Partial payments, broken promises, growing anxiety. Some wouldn't talk at all, just shook their heads and looked away. But their silence said plenty. Back at my kitchen table around midnight, Reynolds showed me how to organize everything. "Auditors need a clear trail," he explained. "We're not just collecting papers, we're telling a story." I learned to add cover sheets, note metadata from scanned files, highlight dates that didn't match. Reynolds had this system with different colored sticky tabs: yellow for payment discrepancies, blue for duplicate entries, red for outright falsified documents. "Always make 3 copies," he insisted. 1 for the auditors, 1 for backup, 1 sealed away where Calvin can't reach it. Around 2 in the morning, Reynolds mentioned something that made me sit up straighter. "There's this high-dollar lease that's been bothering me," he said. "Equipment that should show up in the asset records but doesn't." "The helicopter?" I asked. "That's part of it. But there's more." He pulled out a document with a long string of numbers. "The serial number traces back to an airframe. Aircraft parts. Big money. But it's being run through a shell company that doesn't exist in any public record." I grabbed my own notebook. "How do we follow that?" "FAA registrations are public record. Start there. Then cross-reference with the lease documents. Someone's name has to be on those papers." We spent the next hour tracking that serial number through databases. Each search led to another document, another company name, another dead end that wasn't quite dead. "Look at this," I said finally, pointing at a date. "This lease was signed 3 days before Calvin announced Dad made him executor." Reynolds wrote that down in red ink. By the time we finished, my kitchen table looked like one of those conspiracy walls, minus the red string. But this wasn't conspiracy. This was math. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. I walked Reynolds out to his car as the sky started showing hints of gray. Another workday was coming, and I still had my regular contracts to handle. But now I had something else too. Proof. That was starting to look solid. Back inside, I stared at that serial number we'd traced. Tomorrow, we'd dig deeper into the FAA records, see where that airframe really came from. But first, I needed coffee. Lots of coffee. You ever notice how the truth feels heavy in your hands? Like actual weight you can measure? That's what these papers felt like, spread across my table in the pre-dawn light. The morning after our late-night discovery, I sat at my desk with a coffee going cold beside me. The leasing company's number stared back from my screen. My finger hovered over the call button while I rehearsed my approach. You know that moment when you're about to pull a thread that might unravel everything? Yeah, that's where I was. I'd dealt with aircraft leasing before. Small stuff, mostly lifts for roofing jobs. It gave me just enough industry credibility to make the call sound natural. "Morning, this is Daniel Maddox with Maddox Contracting," I said when the rep picked up. "I'm following up on a lease verification for a Bell 407 helicopter, serial number AH31542. "One moment, please." Keys clicked in the background. "And your interest in this lease?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm conducting a family asset review. The aircraft's been operating in our area, and I need to confirm responsibility for the payments." More clicking. Pause. "Sir, I can only discuss this with authorized parties." "Understood. The registration should list Edward Maddox as guarantor. He's my father." The mention of Dad's name changed something. The rep's tone shifted from corporate to cautious. "Are you aware of the current payment status?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to verify." I held my breath. "The lease is indeed under Edward Maddox's guarantee," she said carefully. "But the operating company, CG Enterprises, has fallen behind on 3 payments." My hands started shaking. I pressed them flat against the desk. "Could you email me a copy of the guarantee documentation? With proper authorization, I'll have Edward Maddox call to approve it," I said, knowing Dad would never check these details himself. An hour later, the email arrived. I stared at the attachment for a full minute before opening it. There it was, in black and white. Dad's signature on a 7-figure guarantee for Calvin's toy. Reynolds arrived just as I finished printing everything. His eyes went straight to the highlighted sections. "Well, well," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "Your brother's been busy." "He used Dad's property as collateral," I said. The words tasted bitter. "Without telling anyone." Reynolds nodded slowly. "We need a certified copy with the full signature chain. This proves the connection." But auditors will want original documentation. That old anger rose up. The kind I'd swallowed at too many family dinners. But this time it came with something else. A clean, sharp sense of justice within reach. "I'll request the certified copy today," I said, already pulling up the formal letter template on my computer. "Daniel," Reynolds' voice had that warning tone. "This stays in the audit package. No social media, no family emails, no revenge posts. Let the process work." I know, and I did know, but damn. It was tempting to blast this across every platform where Calvin loved to showboat. We spent the next hour documenting everything. I pulled Dad's property records, showing clear title with no disclosed liens. Reynolds highlighted where the lease guarantee should have appeared, but didn't. Every page went into a fresh binder with those colored tabs marking the trail. "Time to call the auditors," Reynolds said when we finished. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Marshall and Reed, the firm handling Calvin's year-end audit. The receptionist connected me to a senior partner. "This is about Calvin Maddox's filing," I said. "I have documentation showing significant irregularities." The partner's voice turned professional sharp. "We have procedures for submitting evidence. I'll email you our secure portal access. Everything must be original or certified." "Understood. How long until you review submissions?" "The audit closes in 3 weeks. Submit within 10 days for full consideration." I wrote down the instructions, then looked at the binder we'd assembled. One simple file that changed everything. The helicopter that was supposed to prove Calvin's success now proved something entirely different. Reynolds gathered his coat. "Good work today. But remember, let the process work," I finished. "I know." After he left, I stood at my office window, watching clouds scroll past. The same sky Calvin used for his grand entrance now held a different kind of promise. You ever notice how the truth feels like gravity? Everything falls exactly where it should, once you let go. The next morning, Reynolds spread county records across my kitchen table while I poured coffee into 2 mugs. That had seen better days. The steam carried that same burnt smell from my dad's workshop, the kind that used to mean safety before everything changed. "Look at this filing date," Reynolds said, tapping a document with his pen. 3 months after the helicopter lease. I leaned in. The mortgage paperwork showed Dad's signature again, this time on a second position lien against the family property. 40 acres that had been clear titled since my grandfather paid it off in '82. $500,000, I said, my coffee going cold. "Against land worth 3 times that." Reynolds nodded. "Classic move when the first round of financing runs dry. But look here." He slid another paper forward. "The funds went straight to CG Enterprises' operating account, Calvin's company." The mug handle creaked under my grip. Dad never mentioned this to anyone, because he probably doesn't know. Reynolds pulled out his reading glasses. "Your brother's signature is on the routing authorization. He used your father's electronic signature credentials. See this authentication code? You know that moment when puzzle pieces snap together and show you exactly what you didn't want to see? That's what hit me then. Calvin hadn't just borrowed against Dad's property. He'd done it without even asking. We spent the next 3 hours building the PSI timeline. Calvin's company ledgers showed steady cash burn starting 6 months back. The helicopter lease payments started bouncing around month 4. Then came the mortgage, timed perfectly to plug the holes. "Print everything," Reynolds insisted. "Original sources only, with metadata intact." I ran the printer until it needed fresh paper. Each document got its own sheet listing where it came from, when we found it, and who handled it. Reynolds called it chain of custody, the kind of detail that turns suspicion into proof. "The cover letter needs to be neutral," Reynolds said as I drafted it. "Just facts and page references. Let the numbers tell the story." My first draft was too angry. The second was too detailed. The third finally hit that tone of professional concern. During routine review of family assets, irregularities appeared in certain financial instruments executed against shared property. I labeled specific pages where the worst parts lived. The unauthorized mortgage, the diverted funds, the bounced payments. Each tab told part of the story without spelling out the betrayal burning in my gut. Around midnight, Reynolds did one final check of the packet. "Good work," he said. "Now comes the hard part. Waiting? That too." He closed the binder carefully. "But first you have to walk this into their office tomorrow and act like it's just business." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those documents. Dad's land, Calvin's lies, and 30 years of being the responsible son, distilled into one thick binder of proof. The audit firm occupied the 6th floor of the glass-wrapped building downtown. I walked in at 9 sharp, packet under my arm, trying to keep my face neutral. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where 2 senior auditors waited. "Mr. Maddox," the older one said, "you have documentation regarding CG Enterprises?" I set the binder on their table. "Everything's indexed. The cover letter lists key findings." They opened it together, flipping past my careful tabs. I watched their expressions shift from professional interest to something sharper. The younger one started taking notes. The older one's mouth tightened at the corners. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "The mortgage filing is on page 12, I said. "Bank transfers are detailed in Appendix B." They exchanged a look that said more than words could. The younger one cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review this properly." "Of course." I stood, steady as I could. "My contact information's on the cover letter." "We'll be in touch," the older one said, already turning back to the pages. I rode the elevator down, alone, switched off my phone, and walked out into morning traffic. Behind me, that binder sat like a time bomb on their conference table, ticking louder with every step I took. Back in my truck, I gripped the steering wheel and breathed. The calm I'd forced in their office cracked just a little. Somewhere across town, Calvin was probably planning his next big show. But this time, the numbers would tell a different story. The audit week landed, like a storm front. You could feel the pressure change before anything broke. I kept my head down, focused on my own contracts, and waited for Reynolds' updates. The first ripple hit on Tuesday morning. Reynolds called while I was measuring lumber at a job site. "They want supplementary documentation," he said. "Bank confirmations, specifically." I stepped away from the saw noise. "For the mortgage?" "And the helicopter lease." Standard aisle procedure. They're building their case carefully. We spent that evening pulling statements and authorization records. Every paper trail led back to the same truth. Calvin had leveraged Dad's assets without permission, then covered the tracks with corporate smoke. You ever notice how truth moves differently than rumors? Rumors race like wildfire, but truth seeps in slow, like water finding cracks in concrete. By Thursday, word trickled through normal business channels that Calvin's company couldn't explain basic math to the auditors. Simple stuff. Loans that didn't match deposits. Payments that vanished between accounts. The kind of numbers that make accountants reach for red pens and phone numbers. I was installing cabinets when the first official notice arrived. The letterhead caught my eye. State Financial Crimes Division. They'd been contacted by the audit firm. Not by me, which mattered. The language was careful, neutral. Material discrepancies, potentially fraudulent representations, unauthorized use of personal guarantees. Reynolds read it twice at my kitchen table. "This is exactly how it should happen. Clean. By the book. What's next?" "They'll focus on the fraud angle. False statements to lenders, using your father's name without authority. The helicopter lease alone is enough for charges." I nodded, remembering those rotor blades churning up Dad's lawn. "How long?" "Paperwork moves at its own speed, but it's moving." The family grapevine worked faster. Aunt Sarah called Cousin Mike, who texted his sister Jenny. You know how it goes. The same relatives who'd cheered Calvin's landing got real quiet real quick. Then the questions started. The kind nobody asked when times were good. "Did you see his actual office? Who verified those contracts he talked about? Why didn't anyone check the numbers?" My phone buzzed with careful messages from people testing which side was safe. I kept my responses short. Factual. Let the documents do the talking. Dad's social media went dark first. The weekly updates about Calvin's success stopped cold. The house, usually lit up and busy, stayed shuttered. Cars slowed down driving past, but nobody stopped to visit anymore. I drove by one evening, saw phones glowing through windows like fireflies. Everyone checking messages, watching updates, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dad's truck sat in the driveway, covered in dust. He wasn't taking calls. You might think I'd feel satisfied watching it all unwind, but there's no joy in watching family reality crack. Even when the cracks needed to show. I kept working, same as always. Measuring twice, cutting once, making sure every invoice balanced. Reynolds stopped by Friday afternoon. "The formal filings go public tomorrow morning. Electronic or paper? Both. Standard procedure. They want everything documented beyond dispute." I nodded, thinking about all those carefully indexed pages we'd submitted. "Any word from Calvin?" His lawyer advised silence. Reynolds adjusted his glasses. Smart move, finally. That night, I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee, watching darkness settle over the yard. Somewhere across town, Calvin was probably staring at the same sky, maybe finally understanding what happens when lies run out of room to hide. My phone lit up with another careful message from a relative. "Did you know about any of this?" I set it aside without answering. Dawn would bring public records that no amount of charm could explain away. Numbers don't care about helicopter entrances or social media likes. They just sit there, black and white, telling their own quiet story. 3 weeks after the filings went public, I drove back to Dad's house. No paper bags this time. Just the keys to my new F-150, bought clean with deposits from clients who'd found their way back after Calvin's house of cards collapsed. Remember that old maple tree where the helicopter touched down? I parked right there, the morning sun catching my truck's fresh paint. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson was watering her flowers. She used to wave at Calvin's fancy cars. Today, she kept her eyes on her petunias when she saw me, probably thinking about his empty driveway next door and the seized notices that had decorated it last week. You know what's funny about small towns? They don't forget much, but they sure can go quiet when they want to. I climbed Dad's porch steps, each board creaking exactly like it had that Thanksgiving. The sound brought back the image of those scattered groceries, but this time there was no rotor wash to blame. Just morning light and the weight of things that needed saying. Dad opened before I could knock. He'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Hair mussed, coffee cup trembling slightly, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. Sometimes it takes a hard truth to wash away old illusions. Danny. He stepped back, holding the door. Come in. The living room still had those family photos on the walls, but Calvin's corporate awards were gone from the mantel. Funny how empty spaces can say more than full ones. How bad is it? Dad asked, settling into his chair. I kept it practical, the way he'd taught me years ago when we'd work on cars together. The helicopter's been repossessed. The mortgage can be restructured. Reynolds found a way to separate it from the fraud charges. Your house is safe, Dad. He nodded slowly, fingers working the coffee cup's handle. And Calvin? 3 felony counts. Securities fraud, false statements to lenders, unauthorized use of personal guarantees. I didn't add details about potential sentences. Some things a father doesn't need to hear spelled out. Through the window, I could see Aunt Sarah's car slowing down, probably doing her morning drive-by to gather intel for the family gossip chain. She used to park and stay for hours when Calvin was holding court. Now she just cruised past, phone probably already in hand. Your business okay? Dad asked, and I heard the real question underneath. Was I gloating, taking advantage? I pulled out my phone, showed him the scheduling app. Booked solid through summer. All legitimate contracts, fair rates, no family discounts needed. That earned a slight wince, but he nodded again. Good. That's good, Danny. We sat quiet for a bit, letting the morning fill in the gaps. Sometimes silence does better work than words ever could. Through the walls, I could hear neighbors talking, their voices carrying that particular tone people use when discussing falls from grace. My phone buzzed, a text from Reynolds about another client returning to the fold. I typed a quick response, then checked our company website analytics. Traffic had tripled since the news broke. Funny how people suddenly remember who did honest work all along. Standing to leave, I caught my reflection in Dad's window. Same work shirt, same calloused hands, but the shoulders were straighter now. Amazing what proof can do for a man's posture. I'll have Reynolds stop by, I said. He'll walk you through the mortgage paperwork, make sure everything's proper this time. Dad stood too, slower than he used to. Danny, I raised a hand. Let's just fix what needs fixing. Outside, the morning had warmed up nicely. My truck sat where Calvin's helicopter had landed, but instead of churning up the grass, it just cast a clean shadow on honest ground. The door panel caught the sun, making our company logo shine. Maddox Contracting, building trust since 1998. I gripped the handle, feeling the smooth metal under my palm. Across the yard, Mrs. Peterson had finally looked up from her flowers. She gave me a small wave. Not the excited greeting Calvin used to get, but something better. Simple respect. Looking back at Dad's porch, where those grocery bags had torn open months ago, I said what needed saying. Pride built on lies always falls.